Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the final press conference of the UN Environment Assembly. My apologies for the changes in timing, as is almost inevitable with the last day and plenary and things going on. We've had some changes to the schedule. It is very much my hope that our Executive Director will also be joining us shortly, but I'm deeply conscious of the President's time, and we're very, very pleased that he can be with us at least for a few minutes to share some of his reflections of the journey through the past few days and what we might be expecting at this stage. And I'm very pleased also to have Jackie McGlade with us on the panel today, our former Chief Scientist and the co-author of the pollution report, the background report that has informed the proceedings of this assembly as well. But perhaps let me right away turn to His Excellency Edgar Gutierrez, President of the UN Environment Assembly and Minister of Environment and Energy of Costa Rica.
So we started working in that process very openly, given the space and time for ministers to participate, and at the end of the day we were able to put a draft that was brought to the open-ended CPR that we had last week, and at the end of the day we were able to adopt today during the assembly. I think this accomplishment is a very important one from the political perspective, because it is bringing the willingness, the political willingness of member states to start working together in a program or within an agenda that aligns all other agendas in order to combat pollution. It has been very clear to us, ministers, that pollution is a real problem that is hurting the human rights of all people. It has been very clear. And it has been clear as well to us that we no longer can keep on doing what we have to do as ministers without appealing to science, having the science beside us, having the science guiding us in our own decisions. We have done very bad managing our surroundings. We haven't done a good job. And when I say we, it's not just the governments, but also you guys, you, I mean individuals. We are now facing terrible problems that have to do with pollution, even in water, air, soil, oceans, and that is because the way we are behaving in our society, the way we have decided to follow patterns of consumption. And we have to correct that, we have to modify that, we have to change that paradigm and undertake a different paradigm. So I think in this assembly, we have been able to listen to the scientific community. We have been the opportunity to listen to the business sector. We have had the opportunity to listen to the stakeholders, communities, community leaders, who had a lot of things to tell us and for us to understand how productive is this sort of gatherings for us to think about policy making. And I was saying that science has to guide us, because we have done so bad, as I said, managing our surroundings, that the room that we have for making more mistakes is very narrow. And we have a lot of uncertainties there. And science has the mission to reduce those uncertainties and to lead us to take the right decisions. And science then becomes the best friend that we can have in the decision-making process. And the other friend, the other very good friend, is the people. We can no longer be doing policy making on the backs of the people. We have to see the people at the eye. We have to see the people in front of us as policymakers and understand the messages they are sending to us in order for us to facilitate the processes to overcome the problems they are telling us. That is UNEA. That has been UNEA 3. I think it has been a great assembly. It has been, it is still a very great assembly. We haven't finished yet, but we have had all those opportunities to exchange with different sectors and to learn new technologies and to learn how to access that technology and to see that we are having here, there, over there, very good examples that we must emulate and follow in order to get the ball rolling so that every one of us actually get engaged in combating this great problem that we are facing, that is pollution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Much appreciated and very heartwarming and reassuring. I think we're in for a very, very good conclusion today. As you say, the Assembly hasn't closed yet, and we will have a final press release at the end of the Assembly as well. Deeply conscious of your time, as ever, thank you so much for being able to join us, and please feel free to be excused as you need be. I know that this, in fact, applies to all of our panelists today, so with your permission and hoping I'm not breaching any protocols, I will try to juggle the calendars now and invite our Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director, Ibrahim Chow, for his remarks and reflections.
Thank you. Colleagues, friends, we had two missions. One is accomplished. The second one, we have to start as of tomorrow. The one mission that we have accomplished was for world leaders in charge of the environment to prepare an assessment, a scientific assessment on the issue of pollution, to highlight the significance of the issue and the impact it has on society, on the planet, and on humanity in general. You have received the scientific reports. You have seen here in the Gigiri compound business discussing with leaders, ministers of environment. You have seen civil society. In terms of first mission, it has been accomplished this morning with the adoption of the resolutions and the ministerial outcome document as a policy guidance to the world. That, I think, for us is a mission accomplished. What we need to do next is to move concretely to a plan of action to address the problems we have identified. Some of the actions will have to do with the way we produce and the way we consume. Our models of production and consumption will have to change. We do not have to have models of production and consumption that harm on the environment and keep killing us. We have to change because it is not sustainable and because we are able to change it. As humanity, as human beings, we are intelligent. We know how to change. Now, we cannot say that we don't know that pollution is a problem. We have the assessment, both through our own assessments, but also through others, including the Lancet report that was published recently. These changes in our models of production and consumption will have to be supported by very clear policies coming from governments, both at the national level, but also at the local level, municipalities, local states. These policies have to be conducive to the change that we want to see. For example, some of the decisions that were highlighted in the opening yesterday, banning of plastic bags, single-use plastic bags. Policies that are more favorable to clean productions, low carbon emissions, to more sustainable consumption patterns, this linear economy that we have lived in for far, where we extract, we produce, we consume, and we throw away that linear economy is no longer viable. We have to actually promote the circular economy. So most of these policies are already experimented and are known in many parts of the world, but they need to be generalized. They need to be expanded in all parts of the world. So that second mission cannot be accomplished without your input as media, because you are educators of the world. You would reflect the point of view of those communities that are affected, including yourself, because quite honestly, when the air is polluted, no one is spared. You can hide in a meeting room, but you cannot go outside. So it is important that we all act together, and your contribution is critically important because education, sensitization is critical, as well as implementing new policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chow. And again, I appreciate that you may need to leave us early as well, so at your leisure, please feel free to be excused. Eric, with your permission, if I may, and before we give you the final word and open to questions and answers, I'd like to in fact ask Jackie to just give us some of the top-line figures and commitments and the latest data. Jackie McGlade, our former chief scientist and one of our strongest collaborators on the road to this Environment Assembly, is probably closer than anybody to what's been going on.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone, for a sort of final wrap-up on at least, I would say, the content. And it's been an amazing journey since we started this earlier in the year, because what UN Environment has been able to do is pull off a report that not only brings all of the knowledge together, but puts it into a context where people can act. And I think that's what has been truly transformative. I think if you're a scientist and you've been here over the last 3 days, you would have been able to tick the box and say, satisfied, the evidence was put on the table, it's been checked, and it actually has meaning. But there's a whole other group of people who arrived, the science policy specialists and the citizen scientist community, who I think should also feel that they have been brought much more closer into contact with how evidence can be transformative in terms of policy making. So let me just go back very quickly to the report itself, where we identified 10 hard-hitting areas. These are chemicals or families of chemicals which really needed to be addressed. And I can say, having now analysed the commitments, that many of those hard-hitting chemicals are in the sights of people who are looking for solutions, or at least for dealing with them through policies, which I think is extremely important. In the report, we also created a framework in which we were very careful in saying there's lots of enabling conditions, but you have to do certain things in a certain order. You can't just simply write a policy without the kind of evidence base behind it. And you'll see this afternoon, but certainly in the outcome document, this continued relevance of the science base, the evidence, informing how we can then go forward, I think is important. The final part of it, of course, has been the analysis of the commitments. There is a film, very, very shortly. It shows how, literally from individual citizens making pledges towards commitments, that concept that people are willing to act on the basis of knowledge has really changed. And so when I look at the 88,000 plus individual commitments amongst the 2.5 million pledges, and when I look at the commitments from governments, business, and from civil society, each and every one of them, even from a small town teacher, contains with it the evidence of why they felt propelled to act. So these were not commitments that were simply emotive. They were emotive on the basis that they'd taken information in that explained why they needed to act now. So I think we're really at a crossroads. For me, it's been a sense of amazement that citizen science on one hand and governments have tackled this from a technical point of view, but have translated it quickly into business solutions. So overall, we concluded that on the strength of the commitment and the underpinning data that was referenced, the evidence that was used, we actually can say that if these commitments go forward, 1.4 billion people will actually breathe clean air over the period of these commitments. That 480,000 kilometers, doesn't sound like a lot, but it's 30% of the world's coastlines, will actually be clean. Not cleaned up, but clean. and that nearly 18.6 billion US dollars is on the table for future investment in not only R&D, research and development, but also innovation to find solutions to combat pollution. So I think at this stage we should say, job done, next job begins. And I think that's probably enough from the science side, the citizen science side, and the industry, who are really, I say, compelled to work together now to use the evidence to the best effect and to speed up the science policy cycle so that we actually get answers and solutions much more quickly. Thank you.
Jackie, thank you so much. Let me now turn to the head of UN Environment, Eric Solheim.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you, Nathan. This has been an amazing Environment Assembly. 4,500 people has been around. Goes government delegations, civil society, business, been a much bigger business presence than at any other previous assembly. We have been able to make a political declaration. It's the first of its kind, and all the delegations were ready for finding compromises on key issues. So it has been an astonishing success. But if you are a normal journalist, you will ask, what's next? What's happened after this? If you don't ask that question, you are not journalist. Then there's something else. And let me tell you what I believe is next. I mean, we have put the fight against pollution higher on the political agenda. We have made all nations to call for a pollution-free planet. It's never happened before. We get a lot of input from civil society and business from that. But then how do we translate that into real changes in people's life? But that's what matters. UN is not what matters. People out there, whether they are in Guatemala or in South Africa or in China, but the people out there we must focus on. Let me take three examples: plastics, air pollution, and chemicals. Starting with plastics, I think we need a three-pronged strategy. Number one, there is a huge number of plastics we simply don't need. There is no need for straws. My mother lived to the age of 92. I cannot recall she used a straw, and for sure she would be happy without the straw. She, as everyone else, could drink from the bottle, from the cup, or from the glass. If anyone really needs a straw, let them have it, but let's not put it out to everyone else. The average citizens in North America throw away 600 straws a year, and quite a few of them end up in the global oceans. It may seem a very small item, but in many tourist spots of the world, this is a huge part of the ocean plastic, and we can just live without that. There are a number of other plastics, like when you throw plastics around an apple or two oranges. Why do we need that? Why do I need a plastic plate and a plastic surrounding two apples? I can just buy them as apples, as we did everywhere in the world until just a few years back. You just buy the apple and you take it to the cashier and you go away with it. Secondly, there are a number of areas where we need materials with the same characteristics as plastic. I mean, we need plastic bottles, we need plastics to preserve food, because we want the food to last longer. In many of these areas, it can be replaced with other materials, as I mentioned to a few of you. The promise by Nestlé and Danone that by 2020 all their bottles will be from biomaterials which will degenerate in nature, so of course showing a way forward. In Indonesia, a few months back, we visited young entrepreneurs there making plastic from cassava, sugar canes, potatoes, from natural materials. And of course, I mean, it goes without saying that it's possible to make a lot of materials that way. And then there are plastics we need. We need plastic to make the cars lighter or the airplanes lighter, because that makes it possible for us to use a lot less gasoline. The heavier the car, the more gasoline. The lighter the car, the less gasoline. So one of the reasons why modern cars are much less gasoline sucking than the old cars is that simply that they are lighter. And that material, plastic materials, must be recircled. But if we take these three measures, getting rid of, avoiding what we don't need, changing into new materials when we need it, and recycling when there are when there are the areas where we really need plastic. There is no way to tell me that we can't do this. Governments, business act on this, and citizens and civil society push us. We can do it, and we can do it fast. And I see no reasons why we cannot make this transformation as fast as we did the transformation of smoking. 13 years back, smoking was absolutely normal. Indeed, it was very difficult to find a restaurant in the entire world where we were not allowed to smoke. Now it's exactly the opposite. It's very, very hard to find a restaurant where you are allowed to smoke. No one is smoking in business meeting and political leaders. You cannot think of a government conference where people are sitting around smoking, and it happens so fast. So the phasing out of the unnecessary plastic can happen in the same speed. Air pollution, a lot of the same. Monitoring is absolutely key because people need to know to take the immediate precaution, which may be a mask or just going indoor, or whatever it may be. But measuring is also very key to drive the political process, because if people don't know, if they're not alerted, we will not have the sufficient pressure on politicians to act. Jacqueline, by the way, has worked very hard on these matters. So making sure that we get all the proper measurement, and for sure all this measurement with modern technology can be right there on your mobile phone, so not everyone can have the measurement. What is the air pollution in Copenhagen, in Delhi, in Shanghai? Today you get it right there and you are alerted. Then of course government need to look into the different sources of pollution. In India, which there have been quite a lot of focus on air pollution in India recently, some of this pollution is from agriculture waste. The farmers around Delhi in states of Haryana, Punjab, Uttar Pradesh are burning the waste rather than this being seen as a resource. Obviously, with a conversation between people, you can find ways of seeing this as a resource for new products, for energy on new products, rather than being burned. Electrical mobility, moving from gasoline to electrical cars, is another key area. We have set up a program on electrical mobility. We'll really now work hard with the different nations on this. Every car maker in the world is making electrical cars. Whether it's the German, the Japanese, the American, the Chinese, and all the others, they're all making electrical cars. But it's governments who largely decide how fast this will take over the market, because regulating the traffic, making charging stations, all this possible, will make it faster. Tesla just last week announced a car which will go 1,000 kilometers for one charging, because then many of the historical problems of electrical cars are simply gone. And that's just one example. Chinese and other car makers are doing lot of the same. So this move to electrical mobility is at the center, and we in UN Environment really want to be a source of knowledge share. Then, of course, city governments need to make public transport systems. Even with electrical cars, we cannot overwhelm our cities with cars. If every individual drives a car, there's simply no space. City will die, will not be green. Metro systems are critical. And if you look to the speed this can be rolled out, in 2002, 15 years back, there were 2 cities in China with metros, Shanghai and Beijing. Both of the 2 cities had 2 metro lines. 15 years later, Shanghai and Beijing is by far the 2 biggest metro systems in the world. We have up to 20 lines in both cities, and there are more than 30 cities in China with metro systems. Adding to that, they just launched the first hydrogen run metro in Tangshan in the north. They will roll out in Henan in the central China very soon. Trams, which are not on tracks but can go everywhere in the traffic, which by the way are without drivers. You see such a lot of innovation and new development, and there's no reason why this cannot take root in every part of the world. The combination of electric mobility, bike sharing, as we say here, metro systems, cities in the world can go green at a speed we don't really realize at the moment. And if you look to the greenest cities of the world, in case of China, Shenzhen, or Asia, maybe Singapore, some of the European cities, they are a role model for what the world really can do. Finally, chemicals, which is key pollutant. We just made Minamata Protocol, which is prohibiting mercury in the world, which, by the way, started here. I remember it very well. When Barack Obama came in as a new American president in 2008, one of his first acts was to make possible that for the United States to switch into a pro-stopping mercury position. And it happened here in Nairobi, and the process was set for a convention. And now we have the Minamata Protocol, basically phasing out mercury from planet Earth. But making that general decision, of course, doesn't necessarily immediately help the miner out there who's using mercury in his or her mine. We believe it's about 15 million miners in the world in artisanal mining, small-scale mining, using mercury. They must be provided with an alternative. They have their livelihood from this, the families depend upon it, and the economy of some of the nations depend upon it. I just had a conversation with the president of Guyana in South America, who's here. He spoke at length about this. There's any number of small mines in Guyana. The day before I spoke with the Minister of Environment of Peru, exactly the same. There's a huge number of mines, many people depending upon this, but we don't want that mercury to get into the river system and then hit the health of their families and everyone else. Then governments must provide, regulate markets, make decisions to stop the wrong behavior, but then also make the positive behavior, providing alternatives possible. And this is also an area where aid agencies should step up. Aid agencies have done fantastic on many diseases, but must now also move into the new world of pollution as a main threat to human life, not just malaria, polio, tuberculosis, measles, all this. I've done a fantastic job on that, but that's also act in the same determined way on pollution. But happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Eric. And we have a few minutes for questions. So let me maybe take 2 or 3 and then turn to the panel. I see the hand here. Someone was in the back there at the camera, and over here, right.
Thank you. Would you please introduce some fruits of this event, especially the biggest fruits? Would you please introduce some fruits of this meeting? I heard the ministerial declaration is passed. Right. Thank you. I'm from China Dialogue.
Question to Mr. Eric. As this political declaration is being formed and India has been mentioned, what has been the response of the Indian minister in particular? And has he accepted all that's been reported out of India, and what has he proposed? Did he object to anything?
Thank you. Marie-Ed Leroux from the Agence France-Presse. Jacqueline, I had a question for you, please. It's about the pledges and commitments that you mentioned. Just for clarity, please, where do these pledges and commitments come from? Where are they, made? Is there some sort of a pledge forum? Are all of these from this UNEA conference, or please? And also the resolutions. Have any of them been passed yet? Are they all still have to be passed? When is it going to happen? Thank you.
Maybe I take one more question if it's directed at Eric, because we'll need to excuse him after this first round, and Jackie, I hope, will still be with us for a while. So the questions to Jackie we can take a little later.
Yeah, this is specifically to Eric. I'd like your views on how important you think citizen science will be in helping you to deliver some of the changes that you've been outlining.
Thank you. Let me turn to Eric. Well, last one, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Daniela from Brazil. Is there any chance that in the next UNEA or something, there is a suggestion to ban microplastics, for instance?
Excellent questions. The fruits of the meeting, as I see it, is a hard-hitting resolution setting the world on the path to a pollution-free planet. But of course, it's all the delivery of nations and businesses which will decide whether we come there. The United Nations can set the direction, bring people together, inspire people, but it's the decision by the main governments and every government of the world which will decide. But I tell you, I'm very optimistic. And give you one example. During this meeting, I congratulated the Minister of Environment, Li Ganzhe, from China, with the huge progress we now see in China. In one of the most polluted areas in China, which is Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei, central area around Beijing, you see now a substantial reduction in pollution. Why is that? Well, the government of China has taken determined action. Minister Li has run around, and Minister Chen before him and others to the local level, to the regional actors, to demand action, to put them on course to action. People who didn't act were simply fired, and setting the change, which in China was to a large extent to reduce the number of coal burning. It's not the only issue, but coal burning is a key issue. People are kept warm, they are kept industries, they have done agriculture with coal. So to make that happen, the government has taken determined action. It doesn't mean that all problems are resolved, just that we see for the first time a drastic reduction in the pollution, which will continue. And this is the level of action we need from leaders all over the world to act. On India, you were spot on, because the last person I saw before coming here, or second last, was exactly Minister Harsh Vardhan from India. He was. You asked, did he ask question to anything? No, to the contrary. He was absolutely happy, very inspired by the event. Said it had been a great event. We agreed on a huge number of areas where India and UN Environment will work together in the years to come, pollution being one of them. India will host the World Environment Day in June. That will be a platform for setting out environment practices and inspiring environmental messages from Prime Minister Modi and Indian government, but of course also from local leaders, from business, and from many other people. So I see a same shift in Indian policies in this area as I see in China. I'm not following in detail the declarations and resolutions. From what I've been informed, everything is in order, everything will be agreed. Whether it actually is agreed or just will be, I cannot tell. But we do not foresee any major difficulties. And let me also really use this opportunity to pay tribute to those who had difficulties. United States of America has had some difficulties. Didn't originally support a ministerial declaration. They wanted other formats. But at the end, they have agreed to this. They made some critical comments on some issues, but that's exactly fine. That's what we're happy to see. But they moved along with this. I also commend Israel and Palestine. As you would recall, that was a huge thing passed in the past assembly, really overshadowing issues here. We believe that there is a very, very important, the Palestinian issue is a very important issue. It must be resolved, but it cannot be resolved in Nairobi in the context of environment, only in the Security Council or by a peace process between the parties or in another format. And the flexibility now shown by both Israel and Palestine, accepting that we will set up an assessment mission for the environment in Palestine, looking into what are their issues, and then hopefully also mobilize resources from European Union, United States, basically everyone. Please tell people to support for environment purposes in Palestine. Science is at the bottom of everything. I mean, basically, if you look to environment issues which were resolved in the past, nearly always it started with science. The fact that the ozone layer is now coming back and the ozone hole is repaired started with science. Scientists rang the alarm bell, then citizens started putting pressure, then politicians and business acted. And to get to do the right rather than the wrong thing, we need science. It's always better to resolve a problem in a way which is cheap and simple rather than expensive and complicated. Much better to do something which is lasting rather than short-term. And for all this, science must be the bottom plank for whatever we do. And I'm disturbed by some of the attacks I see globally on science. How can you believe in NASA's climate science, but in NASA's rocket science, and not believe in NASA's climate science? How can you tell people, I fully believe that NASA can take us to the moon, what a fantastic achievement, or to Mars even, but when they make same guys put forward their climate science, oh, then I decide not to believe in that. How can we accept such scientific ignorance? So let's defend science. Let's build our decisions on science. So what was the last question from Sao Paulo? Microplastic, yes, sorry. I can't read my own script. I think there are two aspects to that. I think there is a strong momentum to phase out all the artificially added microplastic, which we see in the fashion business, for instance, where microplastic have been added to perfumes. That may happen just by itself because the market actors decide to change. It may also need a ban in one of the next environment assemblies. We need to get rid of that. There is no use of this, and we can find replacement products. But then, of course, added to that, you have the microplastic, which is more complicated, coming from the way we pave the roads, or the way we clean our clothes, or simply that big plastic bags in the ocean disintegrate into much smaller pieces, which fishes are eating and then coming into our blood. This, of course, we need to attack as part of the huge plastic problem. So, but it's a very well taken, very important issue.
Eric, thank you very, very much. And I know that absolutely, but it is also my great privilege to now welcome and introduce His Excellency Mr. Sim Kistler, Minister for the Environment of Estonia and the incoming President of the UN Environment Assembly, the Fourth Environment Assembly. So we're delighted. Most welcome, please. Minister, thank you so much for being with us. We've been working with a panel under great stress of schedules. So we've heard from the President of this Environment Assembly, Dr. Guterres. We've heard from Eric. It's a great pleasure now to just welcome you for your reflections as Environment Assembly, the Third Environment Assembly comes to a close, and you pick up the mantle, so to speak.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to make a brief statement. I am highly honored to have the opportunity to express my sincere appreciation to the outstanding work and dedication of the President of the third meeting of the Environment Assembly. Mr. Gutierrez has carried the spirit of this meeting with him until the very end. And it will be a challenge to meet such leadership. I promise to stand for the United Nations member states so that the work that needs to be done to protect the health and well-being of the environment and people will carry meaningful results. I also welcome the assertive and mobilizing efforts of the Executive Director, Mr. Erik Solheim, that have raised the visibility of this important meeting of the world's environment ministers. It is essential that the awareness of the people of our common challenges and solutions will raise. Collective action is a force. I'm honored to take over the leading role of a President of the United Nations Environment Assembly. It is a critical task to ensure the success of representing the vision and action of 193 countries. So please let me assure you my highest commitment. I can already express the importance of involving all stakeholders, including the private sector, NGOs, academia, and others, as it has also been stressed several times during this assembly. Ownership of a common goal and action grows from partnerships. I commend the President for his transparency, inclusiveness, and openness, and being a true role model in his approach. Thank you.
Minister, thank you very much, and wonderful that you could join us here, because this is really one of the fruits, in fact, of the Environment Assembly, and there's a expectation of continuity from this Assembly as well, and we really look forward to working with you. We were in question and answer. There was a question to Jackie McGlade, and there's also the question of the fruits of the Assembly, and while we have the Minister here as well, Jackie, maybe just a quick sort of synopsis of the resolutions that we're expecting to come out as well, and then we will look for more questions to the Minister as well.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll start with the question about where do the pledges and the commitments come from. So in total, we had, and I'll just give you some numbers to give you a flavour, we had 215 commitments coming from governments and all organs of government. In other words, it could be local authorities and so forth. So that was a very interesting combination. 23 business commitments, and significant ones, I must admit, not just small things, and 95 civil society. So if we look at the kind of distribution, the big hitters, of course, was on air, and there you saw quite a number of cities coming through with their contributions through the Breathe Life campaign. And at the same time, member states also picked up on the Clean Seas campaign and used their commitment under that. But over and above, the European Union came forward with 20 commitments, which substantively took what I would say, the ideas through to a full policy cycle. So many of these were commitments all the way through to implementation, regulation, monitoring, reporting, and verification. So in the sense of how much weight do we give them, at this stage we have done an analysis which essentially looks at the efficacy of all of those commitments. So imagine you have 333 of commitments which have a lot of substance, from beach resorts saying they're going to do a complete change in their business model, they're not going to use chemicals and so forth, all the way through to member states and EU legislation. And then we have the 2.5 million, or nearly 2.5 million pledges which came through the sort of campaigning portal, which was begun for UNEA. And within that, there was the option for individuals to commit rather than just a simple pledge. And I think it was fascinating to see how many people were really committed then to dealing with chemicals, waste, plastics in their own life and in their communities, and their own consumption patterns. So that was the top hitter. Then we had a lot of people working on air quality, and it had to do very much with transport, switching transport, making sure that their fuel was as clean as possible. Then a large commitment towards better use of land. In other words, sometimes switching diets, so a lot about consumption from meat towards vegetarian, but really recognizing what that means for land, and then putting a lot of their own personal time and effort into conservation, biodiversity, and so forth. And then fresh water. So those were the big hitters from what I would call the individuals who committed themselves. So I think you can see that people were reading the report, reading the top line, and translating that into personal action. 88,700 people made personal commitments as opposed to a simple pledge. People really thinking about what they were going to do. Now, on the resolutions, you realize that we're in a kind of interregnum. We're about to go in to have a final session. So we have, on the books, we have resolutions. I'll just give you the sort of highlights of what they cover. There's a resolution which talks about the Sustainable Development Agenda, how we're going to deliver that. There's one on environmental innovation, and making sure that that essentially becomes part of any going forward in terms of beating and combating pollution. One on soils, very important. It's the first time we've actually had a resolution on soils. Air quality, of course, I think that's had a lot of exposure, so to speak, here. Then we had a cluster which came together to do with lead. So lead in fuels, in batteries, and that's been a very comprehensive resolution, trying to really tackle the tail end of what we know is a long kind of pollutant story, but now really tackling it head on. Biodiversity, of course, that's writ large. How does pollution and biodiversity come together, and so really trying to protect at the level of individual ecosystems and species, and then water quality. So we've really covered the range, and the angle, of course, is always on water itself. There's then a resolution on marine litter, no surprises. Some conversation about the technical aspects of what constitutes litter, microplastics and so on. That's all been resolved, so we have a strong resolution there. Then one on environment and health. That is also, an important brick. Now, I will admit at this stage that I have to give feedback on this because I don't know what the final outcome is. I know it's gone forward, but I don't know what form. And that was around the territories within the Middle East. There was a conversation there. And I must admit that I didn't see, I was just checking. I think it's gone through as a document, but forgive me, I can't give you the final update on that. But all the previous ones have now got agreed text ready for conversation at the ministerial level. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. I know that the closing plenary has now been called for 3 o'clock, so we're a bit pressed for time, but let me see if there's any questions, and we might take a round or two. With your permission, Minister, maybe we'll take 2 or 3 questions, collect them, or would you prefer one at a time? Collect them. Very, very good.
We need to be
quick.
Very quick. Maybe just 1 round of questions, maybe 3 questions. I saw the hand in the corner back there. The two in the back, and then one up here, up front here.
Thank you. My name is Ochemo Godo. I've got a question to Jackie McLeod. Jackie, there are commitments that have been made at this meeting, but I'm just wondering about the business policy interface in terms of implementation. How strong do you see that one coming up, especially for the developing world that don't have innovations, they don't have a lot of good science, and these things will require fundamentally a shift in the way things are being done. Thanks.
Thank you very much. My name is Edouard Michel. I work for the French National Center for Scientific Research. So I was very happy to hear Mr. Gutierrez saying that science was the best friend for decision making. I was wondering whether there was the project to actually have a structured, very inclusive mechanism to include science in the decision making process for UNEA, for instance, in the model maybe of IPBES or IPCC or whatever, because science can be many things. It can be citizen science, it can be individual experts, it can be huge universities, it can be very small, people. So it's not relevant all at the same time or at the same level, and maybe some structured inclusive mechanism would make sense. And if it's not a project, why? Thank you very much.
My name is Zhu Shaobing from China's Xinhua News Agency. I also would like to raise a question to Jacqueline. And you said that more than 2.5 million individuals have made the pledge on the campaigning portal. And do you think that, can we say that the public awareness regarding pollution and environment protection globally is on the rise? But are you hopeful that this pledge they made today will be kept and stay effective in the future? And also, this is a quick question, and also, what are the trends or emerging channels that you have observed that will have great potential in driving our global efforts in reducing pollution? Because we have witnessed like the internet increasingly has played a bigger role in raising public awareness and mobilizing people to actually participate in a very convenient way. And also the traditional way, like investing big in the just the transport system. And what else trends or channels do you see? Thank you.
Before I turn to Jackie, let me just see if there's any questions for the Minister, because I'm anxious for his time, and if there are no questions, we will thank him and excuse him. I know he's very busy. Any question for the Minister? If not, Minister, thank you so much. We look forward to the 2 years ahead.
Let me just then quickly run through these. So the first, well, maybe I go to the very last question because I think that will provoke other parts of the answer. I think that follow-up is crucial. I think citizens will want to feel that they've been heard, and that's something that will now be discussed amongst not only ministers, but also I think within the UN itself, how to handle the next period before the UNEA fall. So there isn't a specific answer because there hasn't been a decision. However, it's very obvious that quite a lot of the commitments from governments particularly are already entrained within campaigns which have got that kind of feedback, the Breathe Life, the Clean Seas and others. What I felt very clear, what very clearly came out of this is that the amount of interest coming from so many different corners demonstrated places where other public campaigns have a real chance to take root amongst people's thinking. So, and I could give you a few ideas, but I think it's important that we use this as an indicator, not just of what people feel that needs to be tackled by governments, but what actually we can do with citizen science and with communities and local communities. There will be a report of all of this. It'll come out, I'm sure, in the next few weeks, and then that will give you more insight into what all these numbers mean. Just on the science process, there is actually a decision. I made a distinction between decisions and resolutions. Decisions are more what I would say procedural, and within the decision, sorry, it was about science process, there is a reference made to the Global Environmental Outlook and how it should proceed, and in a way it is the IPCC, IPBES approach, but it has a lot more participation by citizen groups, by citizen science, and a much broader pool of expertise. So it's not just research communities that are drawn from, it's a much bigger pool, policy experts and so forth. So it's a blend, if I can put it that way. It really is the science policy. Now, does it have business in it? Yes, it does. So when I was setting up the GEO6 community, we made an effort to reach out to those elements of industry and business who were really directly involved in needing to know or handling data or having better ideas about where the world was going regarding the state of the environment. So I think the procedure is well understood, but the decision encapsulates that different approach into the kind of workings of the UN environment. How to make sure it all happens, and is there a different protocol for business? Well, I think, Eric has said it all. He fundamentally believes that much of this can't be achieved without business, that governments certainly can't do things on their own. But I think what's happened here is that many governments in the developing world have understood that there's a new level of demand required of them to not only bring their own business sector up, so literally not always going outside of the country, but trying to generate innovation and technology within their own national setting. And so it goes hand in hand with what the Ministers of Science are looking to, which is to build science infrastructure, to build up capacity, to actually feed the machinery of technology and innovation. And we see signs of that here. And I hope that that 18.6 billion that I managed to kind of draw from all the commitments is exactly the kind of funds that we need, because they're coming from all different layers. It's not just big government or the banks. These are investments from business themselves and from local authorities and so forth. Okay? Thank you.
Jackie, last panelist sitting, thank you very, very much. Very, very helpful. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for all your work leading up to this day. Dear friends from the media, the closing plenary has been announced to commence at 3 p.m. and you are most welcome to attend it as well, and that should hopefully be the decisive point in terms of hearing the outcomes of the Assembly. Again, the press release, the final press release of the Assembly will only be released after the session has been gavelled. Thank you so much.